In 1964, Colonel Sanders signed away Kentucky Fried Chicken for $2 million. But the strangest part wasn't what he sold, it was what he kept. Because inside that deal, Sanders didn't just cash out, he stayed. As the face, as the quality controller, as the living trademark of the companies he no longer owned. And from that moment, KFC went from a fast-growing chicken franchise to a global empire. People sometimes talk about this like it was a secret deal, but in the sources there is no confirmed secret arrangement. The real story is more interesting, because the turning point wasn't hidden in a vault. It was hiding in plain sight. A $2 million sale that gave investors the company and left the Colonel as the myth. And that combination changed everything. Before KFC was a global brand, before China, before thousands of restaurants, before fried chicken became one of America's biggest fast food exports, it started with one man in Corbin, Kentucky. And a recipe nobody was allowed to know. Harlan David Sanders was born in 1890 near Henryville, Indiana. But the story most people know begins much later. In 1930, Sanders began serving Southern-style fried chicken at a roadside motel and service station in Corbin, Kentucky. This wasn't a global headquarters. It wasn't a billion-dollar idea. It was food for travelers. A roadside meal, chicken cooked by a man still years away from becoming the face on the bucket. Then, in 1935, the governor of Kentucky gave Sanders the unofficial title, Colonel of Kentucky. That title became part of him, not just a nickname, a costume, a brand. By 1950, Sanders began wearing his iconic white suit in public. And this matters, because long before social media, long before influencers, Sanders understood something powerful. If people remembered the man, they might remember the chicken. But the real engine was not the suit. It was the system. In 1939, Sanders perfected his blend of 11 herbs and spices. KFC still describes that recipe as top secret. 11 ingredients, one identity, a secret recipe that could travel farther than any single restaurant ever could. And just as important, Sanders had a pressure cooking method that helped shorten cooking times compared with preparing chicken in a pan. That was the business insight. Make the chicken consistent, make it faster, make it repeatable, then teach other people how to sell it. But here's the twist. KFC's first franchise didn't open in Kentucky. In 1952, the first Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise opened near Salt Lake City, Utah. The name said Kentucky. The expansion started somewhere else, and in the beginning, Sanders' franchise contracts were described as handshake agreements. Simple, personal, almost impossibly informal compared with what KFC would become. Restaurants reportedly paid Sanders 5 cents for every chicken, or bird, sold using his recipe. 5 cents. It sounds tiny, but that number is the seed of the empire. Because Sanders wasn't just selling food anymore. He was licensing a method, a taste, a brand, a repeatable promise. And if enough restaurants sold enough chicken, those nickels could become something much bigger. Then came 1956. Sanders sold his Corbin, Kentucky restaurant, and he went on the road to sign up new KFC franchisees. This is one of the most important moments in the story, because Sanders had to stop being just an operator. He had to become a salesman for the system. He reportedly traveled across the United States trying to convince cooks by letting them test his method. Imagine the pitch. Not a giant corporation, not a modern franchise machine, just the Colonel, showing up with his recipe, his method, and his white suit. The man was selling chicken, but he was also selling belief, and the belief started working. In 1957, KFC introduced the original bucket. That bucket mattered because it made the product feel bigger than a plate. It became something portable, shareable, recognizable. By 1963, KFC had around or over 600 locations, not just in the United States. There were already overseas franchises in Canada, the UK, Mexico, and Jamaica. Pause on that. Before the famous sale, before the investor takeover, before the global explosion, Sanders had already built a serious franchise business. 600 locations, and some of them were already outside America. So the idea that KFC became global because of one mysterious secret deal is too simple. The Colonel had already built the foundation, but the foundation had a problem. It had become too big for him. According to LoveFood.com, Sanders sold KFC because the business had become too big for him. And that sets up the deal that changed the company's future. In 1964, Sanders sold KFC for $2 million to a group of investors led by John Y. Brown Jr. and Jack C. Massey. $2 million for a chain that already had around 600 locations. That sounds like the end of Sanders' control, but it wasn't the end of Sanders, because the contract included a lifetime salary, and it included an agreement that Sanders would remain the company's quality controller and trademark. That is the key. The investors got the company, but Sanders stayed attached to the meaning of the company. He was not just the founder, he became the proof, the face that told customers this chicken was still connected to the original recipe, the original method, the original kernel. This is where the story turns, because after the sale, KFC could scale with investor leadership, but it could still sell authenticity through Sanders. That combination is rare: capital on one side, character on the other. And for fast food, character is currency. A burger chain can sell speed, a pizza chain can sell convenience, but KFC had a human symbol, a white-suited colonel whose image said, "This came from somewhere, this has a story," and suddenly the company could expand without losing its central myth. That is the real secret of the deal, not a hidden arrangement, a documented structure. Sell the business, keep the founder as the brand. After 1964, KFC expanded rapidly. In 1965, KFC debuted in Lancashire, England in the UK, and by 1970, the company had reached 3,000 restaurants and outlets in 48 countries. That is the wow moment. Around 600 locations in 1963, 3,000 outlets in 48 countries by 1970. In just a few years, KFC became one of the first American fast food chains to expand internationally. This wasn't just restaurant growth. It was American fast food learning how to travel, and KFC had an advantage. Chicken crossed borders differently. A bucket, a recipe, a branded method, and a founder's face could be translated into new markets. But the expansion also changed what KFC was. It was no longer just Sanders chicken. It was a corporate asset, and the price of that asset was about to explode. In 1971, John Y. Brown Jr. sold KFC to Heineken for $285 million. Think about that jump. In 1964, KFC sold for $2 million. In 1971, it sold for $285 million. That is what scaling did. That is what the 1964 deal unlocked. Sanders Franchise Foundation had become a corporation valuable enough for a packaged food and drinks company to buy. And all the while, the Colonel's image kept doing its work. Depending on the source, Sanders remained tied to KFC after the sale through quality control, ambassador work, advertising, and the use of his persona as the company trademark. The details vary, but the pattern is clear. KFC kept using Sanders as the living bridge between old and new. The company could grow into something bigger than him, but it could not easily grow without him. That's the paradox. Sanders sold KFC and somehow became even more important to it. By 1980, when Sanders died, sources estimate there were around 6,000 KFC outlets in 48 countries, with $2 billion in annual sales. 6,000 outlets, $2 billion in annual sales, all connected back to a roadside chicken recipe from Corbin, Kentucky. And after Sanders' death, the ownership changes kept coming. In 1982, Heineken was acquired by R.J. Reynolds. Then in 1986, R.J. Reynolds sold KFC to PepsiCo. The announced price was $850 million. The actual sale was $840 million. KFC became part of PepsiCo's restaurant division, alongside Pizza Hut and Taco Bell. By then, it was no longer just a chicken chain, it was part of a fast food portfolio, a global brand built to sit beside other giants. But one of KFC's biggest global moments came the next year. In 1987, KFC became the first Western restaurant chain to open in China, with an outlet in Beijing. That was more than a store opening. It was a symbol. American fast food entering one of the most important markets in the world, and the brand carrying it was still built around the same old elements. Chicken, recipe, bucket, kernel. Today, sources disagree on the exact present-day size of KFC. One figure says around 20,000 outlets in 118 countries. Another says around 30,000 locations in more than 147 countries. The exact current count is not confirmed in the sources, but the direction of the story is undeniable. A roadside restaurant became a worldwide chain, a handshake franchise model became an international corporation, a 5-cent royalty became a global machine, And the most important deal wasn't secret. It was smarter than secret, because it understood something many companies forget. You can buy a business, but you can't easily buy its story. John Y. Brown Jr. and Jack C. Massey bought KFC in 1964. They bought the franchise system. They bought the growth potential. They bought a company already moving beyond America. But by keeping Sanders as the quality controller and trademark, the deal preserved the one thing that made the company feel original. The investors could build the empire, Sanders could remain the legend, and KFC could be both modern and old-fashioned at the same time, corporate but personal, global but supposedly rooted in one man's recipe. That is why the 1964 sale matters. Not because it created KFC from nothing. It didn't. Sanders had already done the brutal early work. He had served chicken in Corbin, perfected the 11 herbs and spices, built the franchise model, opened the first franchise near Salt Lake City, driven the expansion to around 600 locations. But the sale changed the ceiling. Before 1964, KFC was a fast-growing franchise built around a founder. After 1964, it became a scalable corporation built around a founder's image. That difference is everything, and this is the hidden lesson inside the so-called secret deal. The recipe was secret, the deal was not. The real magic was the structure. The Colonel sold the company, but the company never stopped selling the Colonel. That is how KFC became a global empire, not by removing its founder, but by turning him into the brand's most valuable ingredient.